Hello everybody and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. The Magical Learning Podcast is a podcast that takes important topics in business and life and looks at them in a fun and lighthearted way. This week we're talking to Rebecca Sutherns about reimagining careers and lives. A lot of people go down one path and then they decide that actually maybe they want to do something else. Well, this is a great podcast for you. Rebecca's got an amazing amount of insights and some really interesting ideas. So as always, I hope you're having a good week. And as always, have a magical week. Hello everybody and welcome to the Magical Learning Podcast for this week. If you haven't come and check out the video, there is an exciting element on Spotify. We're using a new technology called Riverside, and so you can come check that out. It's very exciting. Highly recommend popping over to the Spotify page. And if you want to see what everyone's looking like on this call, do it right now because we're going to check in with them all. So let's start with Al. Al, always good to have you on the podcast. How are you going this week?
Thanks, Jez. I'm going really well. Some exciting news. As you know, I've been doing a few different crane, dogging and rigging and machinery operating courses. And a couple of weeks ago, the guy asked me if I'd come back as one of the trainers. And I'm starting there on Monday.
That is so exciting, Al. Congratulations. It's been, for listeners will know, it's been a full journey for you. So it's very exciting to see sort of a bit of a resolution to that.
It has. It's working out really well. I'm a little bit excited and a little bit nervous, but looking forward to the opportunity on Monday.
Well, we're excited for you, and we'll check in next time to see how it's all going, Al. Very exciting. Great way to kick it off today. It's also, I have to say, our theme is reimagining careers and lives. I feel like it's quite relevant to today's topic, Al, so that's very exciting. Let's jump
very
into...
much so.
Yeah, I think so. Great. Let's jump into you. How are you going this week?
Hello. I am well. Thank you for asking. I'm good, Jez. Thanks, mate. It's where have we been this week? We've been here. We've been in Canberra, funeral, and so far this week I am reptile free.
That's always good. I think, Graham, excitingly, it was exciting to get that AI version of you at the start there. Always good to get that in.
Or was
and
it
good that
the
you're reptile free this week.
Was it the real version? Sometimes it's hard to tell.
Well, that's definitely a question for our audience to listen in on, and maybe review the footage and see what you think.
Yeah, don't look at the video, folks. It's Friday. It's not a good one.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Graham. I'll throw it to Jeanette. Jeanette, how's your week been?
Yeah, my week's been really good, Jez. A bit of delivery, doing some stuff at the farm, and this morning, very exciting, both of the chickens are laying again, and we got a double yoker from one of them. So, given it's coming full on into autumn and there's leaves everywhere, I think that's pretty cool. So, yeah, great week. And so excited for today's topic.
Definitely, very cool, and it's always good. I like that we do get a pretty broad spectrum of animal interactions on from Sunnyside. It's always good to hear. And Rebecca, how's your week been?
Well, I'm laughing just because I'm thinking I'm trying to follow the pattern, and maybe I need to say what my week is free of. So I too am reptile free, whatever that means. I'm not exactly sure, but if that's the new way of answering questions, that yes, in winter, winter in Canada, I will assure you that I am reptile free this morning or this afternoon for me. And it's been a good week. We just got home from spending a month away working in a city that's about a 5-hour flight from where I live in Canada. And so this is my first week back at my desk in my sort of native habitat. But my husband, Tim, is still out there skiing and has had, 30 centimeters of new powder and sun every day. And he's having a fabulous extra week of vacation. And so I'm feeling a little back in routine, but not fully yet. And I'm glad to be here. So thanks for having me.
Amazing, Rebecca. And I think before we leave you just to go, because we've got John that's just joined, but Rebecca, you were mentioning before that what is the actual building that you are recording out of?
So we live in what was a church. It was a Presbyterian church that was built in 1899, and it functioned as a church until about 2002. And then a family bought it and renovated it, had amazing vision for what it could be. And they were here for 5 years, 4 of which I think it was under construction. And then another family had it for a bit, and we've been here for 10 years. So we're walkable to the downtown core of the city where we live in Ontario, Canada. And I'm sort of up in the, not quite in the apex of the church, but close. And it has still the original wooden ceilings. When they made it a house, they insulated on the outside because it's cold where I live. But they retained the look of the wood inside. So it's got lots of good angles and wood and good carpentry and that kind of stuff. So we love it.
Yeah, I mean, it looks amazing. Just, what an interesting location. It's got to be one of the most interesting locations from a magical learning guest. So great that you're doing that for us, Rebecca. Appreciate it.
Jez, just before you hand over to John, Rebecca, can I just share a couple of things really quickly? Firstly, the whole of Canada is reptile-free, pretty much.
Well, yes.
Secondly, and please don't take this the wrong way, but do you have a spare bedroom?
Well, I keep hearing that you are basically an honorary Canadian, and you have yet to drop by, but know that the invitation is always open. And I have so many spare bedrooms.
Interpol has yet to catch up with me, so yeah, okay. I'll be there probably Tuesday next week.
You know what? I'm only in like 18 months into empty nest, having raised 4 kids in this big space, and so I have more bedrooms than I know what to do with right at the moment.
Cool.
So
I'm a child anyway,
several,
so
actually.
Problem solved. Thank you.
Amazing. Well, we'll make sure to send some snakes over there with you, Graham, as well, just to make sure. We don't want you to feel too out of place, I think. John, great to have you on. How are you going?
Howdy all. Graham, you'd get struck down by lightning if you went into church, wouldn't you?
I think it's been deconsecrated, John, but it's actually a really good point. The crucifixes usually spin upside down.
Yeah.
I'm just looking, clear blue sky here, but I'm probably going to get hit shortly, so, Thanks, John. Appreciate that.
No worries. No, very good, Jess. Yeah, it's a good week. I'm working from home today, so that makes it even better. Got daughter down from Brisbane, for the weekend, which is fantastic, so we get to do some stuff with her. But yeah, life's good. Life's very good.
Amazing. Well, it's so good to have you back on, John. It's been a little while, so
It's been a while.
It's a pleasure to have you back. Very exciting. Well, Rebecca, I might throw to you. So, Rebecca Sutherns, you're our guest today. I think we've talked to everybody here, but I think we've got to get into you. So, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself before we jump into the topic today?
Sure. Where to start with a big question like that? My practice really focuses on reimagining your next chapter, and the way I help people do that is through strategy. I'm a facilitator. I love group processes. I'm in year 27 of doing that, and I focus mostly on community-minded organizations. So sometimes that's private sector companies that are really strongly mission-driven. Sometimes it's across the country looking at a particular problem or issue like homelessness or food security or something, and we bring lots of organizations together. And sometimes it's at a personal level where somebody is navigating a transition and needs personal strategic planning, in a sense, to help them reimagine what that next chapter can look like. So sometimes it's speaking, sometimes it's coaching, lots of facilitation. So on the job front, that's what I do. And I think I mentioned we've got 4 grown kids, so they still keep me busy even though they're not living here. And 2 grandbabies that live about 400 meters from here that keep me even busier than that. So lots of family time, and really enjoy the work that I do as well.
Amazing. Well, I mean, that makes total sense for the topic that we're going to talk about today, which is, of course, reimagining careers and lives. Now, before we jump into the questions, this is, as you're saying, this is your job, so you're a perfect expert to talk about this. But just before we get into the topic, is there anything you want to sort of talk about broadly, or why you chose this topic?
The journey to get here was that my practice has really been about adaptability. So I wrote a book 5 years ago called Nimble that was a facilitation focused book. It was basically, hey, if you're at the front of the room and things don't go the way you planned, don't worry about it. Loosen your grip on your script and figure it out. And little did I know that a year later, kind of everyone would need to be figuring out this idea of nimbleness, not just when you're running a meeting, but in every part of your life. And so that sent me on a journey of really focusing on helping people build their adaptability. And what I'm learning inside that work is that one piece of adjusting and being responsive to context and kind of thinking about what it looks like to navigate change that I noticed was kind of underused in people as a resource, almost as a tool in their toolbox that they just weren't pulling out, was imagination. And I'm interested in things that we often think are individual pursuits and how I often see them as group activities. So it's almost like you see it as an individual sport, but it really is a team sport. And imagination is like that for me. Curiosity is also like that for me, where we often think of it as being only in our own heads, but actually the more you dig into it, the more powerful it becomes in group settings. And that's really where I got into the idea of collective imagination and what that can do for communities and cities and families. And so that's what I'm leaning into these days.
Amazing. Well, that is a very rich topic, so I think we better just jump straight into it. I'm very excited to hear what you've got for us today. So I might start with Danette. Danette, what was your question? Do you want to tell us a little bit about why you chose it as well?
Rebecca, I'm known for asking 2 questions, so I always like to do 2. So my first one is, what are the benefits of reimagining? Because I imagine there are people out there that haven't thought of this topic at all. So just understanding why it's such an important thing to do.
Am I getting both right now, or is that only one at a time?
And then I'll come with the second one.
Okay. I was waiting. I think that, first of all, imagination is super creative and fun. And I think that we think of it as being the territory of kids, right? That we should grow out of it. And I'm exploring the idea of growing into it. So I think one of the reasons I think people should give it a few minutes of consideration at least is that it is kind of fun and creative and innovative and playful. And it's had a bad rap because we think of it as being juvenile, as being, rainbows and unicorns, and not really thinking of its usefulness. And so I could speak for longer about why I think it's useful, but I think part of it is that we tend to, when we're building plans and looking ahead, we actually use tools that look back. We look at data, we look at our experience. It's all rear view mirror stuff. And so another thing I like about imagination is that it does propel us forward, and it comes out of experience for me, because I think that when I work with groups, I notice that people use the same words but don't always mean the same thing by them. And so the picture they have in their head doesn't match the picture that their neighbor has in her or his head. And until we actually talk about sketching that out, what are you actually imagining? What are you envisioning? We are much more likely to be able to build it together if we've had some conversations about what you're seeing, because you might call it the same thing, but when you actually sketch it out or fill in the shading and the colors, you go, oh, I was seeing it differently. And it leads to some good dialogue. And it also means that we can build something together more easily when we can see it. If you can't picture it, it's like Stephen Covey would say that the mental creation precedes the physical creation. So I think that's the other reason it's important, is that until you can visualize it, you can't get there.
So love that answer. That's awesome. So my second question was, what stops people from reimagining?
As I've been investigating this, Danette, I'm learning that I'm really terrible at this. So I will answer it really personally, in the sense that I can't believe, as someone who thinks of themselves as sort of a creative, high energy person, I'm not very imaginative. And I'm realizing that I think we are stopped primarily by kind of the inertia of what we know. And so we can only actually imagine. It's interesting that we can imagine things that we've seen before. Isn't that weird? Our brains aren't good at thinking of something that has no reference point in reality. So if you think about, if I said to you, imagine a color that we don't yet have a name for, our brains, it hurts. You go, you're going is it yellow? Is it a pink? Is it a green? We reference it to colors we've seen, right? It's very, almost impossible for us to think of a color we've never seen before. And so that's partly what makes imagination hard, is that it's always referenced against known stuff, which can kind of pull us back into stuff that isn't particularly imaginative, just status quo stuff. And then I do suspect that it's not a muscle we've used very often since we were kids. And so it's really stiff and really weak and gets better with practice. But has, as I mentioned, it's got kind of this bad reputation or this juvenile reputation of being, something that kids do. And also maybe something like if I said to you, let's spend some time imagining, what are you going to do? Sit and like concentrate really hard? Like it's like, how do you do it? What do you do? Right? And so that's why I think in group situations where we can actually, sharpen each other's ideas and go, what about this? What about that? Did you think of this? It's easier to do as a group actually, because alone, short of throwing on a, superhero cape and going and pretending you're somebody else, it's pretty hard to exercise your imagination sitting by yourself.
Great answer as well. I can't wait to hear the rest of this. Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca.
Pleasure.
Yeah, amazing. Great questions to tee us up as well. So thanks for that, Danette, and thanks, Rebecca. Great stuff. Let's throw over to Graham. Graham, what was your question? Tell us a bit about why you chose it.
I think we've already covered that, Jess. My question was, did Rebecca have a spare bedroom? And I guess the other question, the follow-up from that is, do you have an exorcist handy for afterwards? Thanks, John. Miss you.
Yeah.
On a slightly more serious note, so I'm imagining me sitting here being serious, and it's really, really hard work. What was my question so long ago? If we accept the current sort of science around the fact that we have three brains, like head, heart, and gut, in your experience, which of those do you think is the most influential in the reimagining process? Because I suspect, logically you'd go to, well, the brain obviously, because it's this thing up here that does all of the imagining. I'm not entirely sure. So I was just curious as to your thoughts on how much does our gut, our intuition, how much does our heart, what sort of role do they both play in the whole reimagining thing?
Oh, I love that question. I think people think of imagination as happening in our heads, and I think part of my small crusade here is to get us out of that. Because I feel like the emotional piece, the heart piece, is very compelling in the way that I like to use imagination as a tool. So it's helping people articulate what they want, what the future they would like to live into. That's a very compelling kind of emotional place. And I think it ends up getting either confirmed by the gut, or like that the filter is kind of gut level of going, yes, like I just know that that's right. But I think where the details get filled in is at the heart level, because I think part of that is that counterpoint against only working from experience or only working from data, which tend to be a little more, at least on the data side, tend to be a bit more cognitive. And so I'd like people to round that out by adding something in that says, what lights you up? What kind of future is so compelling that you want to work really hard to help create it? And I feel like there's a lot of heart in that. So it is always all three, but I think it's a lead with the heart piece, which may be why, in response to that earlier question of what makes it hard, to the extent that we find it hard to lead out of that space, maybe that's something else that holds us back.
Nice, I like it. Thank you.
Awesome, great insight. Taking some notes as well. These are really interesting. I might go to John now. John, what was your question, and why'd you pick it?
Didn't actually have one, Jez, that I put in there. So, Rebecca, I can throw you on the spot. Jez has just thrown you under the bus. You were saying that imagining is something we haven't done since we were kids. And this is something, when I teach, I sort of talk about that, as kids we play and we visualise and we accept that we're going to make mistakes. But we, as adults, we don't do that. How do we as adults start doing that for something that we've kind of forgotten? And are kids getting worse at it? Because as a kid I was told, get outside and play and don't come back till dark, and you filled in those 12 hours or whatever it was that you were outside for, whereas kids are now on games, and it's all follow the, do things that way. So, yeah, how do we get people to do it?
Yeah, it's lots to unpack there, because I think that sometimes we think that adults are less creative than kids. And what we know about that is now that adults are more selective about their curiosity. So it's not that they're less curious than kids are, but they focus their research, their investigation, their exploration into things they're specifically interested in, because they've kind of filtered out the stuff they think they're not interested in. And so adults will exhibit curiosity, but just in a much more targeted way than kids do, because kids tend to be a bit more free-ranging and less instrumental about it, that they're trying to get something done, whereas an adult will be curious often for a reason. And so as we help adults tap into this, I do find that conversation and dialogue are helpful. I just like, so that, people's questions, just like this conversation, can kind of go, well, what about this? And what about that? And could we go deeper here? That kind of thing. And even just bringing it to people's consciousness in terms of, tell me more about that. And then you go, oh, well, actually, I hadn't really thought about it in any more detail than that. I just had this kind of like vague idea. And I'm like, okay, well, sketching the details of that. How could we? How might we? What if we? And for me, a lot of that does happen in dialogue, but dialogue that is sort of directed to helping people. I really do. I think in metaphors. So I picture somebody sketching something like a pencil sketch, and then a thinking partner, a talking partner kind of going, grab a color, shade something in, like, tell me a bit more about what that would be like. And so those are some of the ways. And I think another specific way, which seems maybe like a tangent, but it's actually really related. If we can only imagine as a jumping off point of something that we've already thought of or seen or experienced, if that's true, then we need to make sure that we've had a really wide range of experiences. And that can come directly, like traveling, for example, or if that's out of reach, it can come through reading, for example. But exposure to a range of diverse people and ideas and contexts spurs our imagination in a way that we need. Because if we've got a really limited portfolio of images to draw from, we're going to be quite anemic in our ability to imagine. And so, on to the kid question, to the extent that our kids are more limited than they used to be in what they're exposed to, and or maybe the opposite, I think our kids' exposure to stuff is directly proportional to their imagination in that sense. So if they are only and always on the same game, that's a very small world for them than if they are out, exploring the farm for the day. But what happens if it's exploring the farm for the day, or yes, on the internet, but using it to visit museums that they would never be able to go to in person until they're much older, right? And all of a sudden their imagination is lit up as a result of that. And so it's not automatic that tech equals less imagination, but it depends on how you use it. And I think dialogue and exposure would be two places that I'd say that would be an interesting way to grow our imaginative energy.
Yeah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's triggered some thoughts for me.
Good.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that, John. Also, John, I might get you just to pop on mute there, just to get a little bit of background sound in there. But let me jump over to Alan. Alan, what was your question? Tell us a little bit about why you chose it.
Yes, Rebecca, my question is, how important is our tribe to help us reimagine a part of our lives? And I guess it's I'm probably I'm imagining a scenario in my mind where I'm driving a bus down the multi-lane highway and all the people of my life are in that bus. We've been down that road every day. We know that road so well. And one day I see a little dirt track off to the side, and maybe there's a crane down there that I want to go and look at. And I'm thinking, the impact those people on the bus will have to whether I go down that track or not.
Now I'm sort of lost in that story a little bit, because I think I hadn't thought of it that way, but I think part of that story says to me, sometimes our our closest people are not always the people that encourage us to be our most imaginative, right?
Yes.
They stand to benefit maybe, or at least from a familiarity point of view, their brains stand to benefit from us behaving in predictable ways, fulfilling predictable roles, answering the questions the way they think we will answer them, maybe not asking us questions at all. And yet they may also be our biggest cheerleaders, right? So they may be the people that want the best for us compared to anyone else in the world. And so to the extent that their support and encouragement can push us down that little track, that's quite different than us having to convince the whole bus to come with us. You know, like the whole bus is going down the track. That feels like, I'm not going to ask them. So that then gets me thinking about, you know, your initial question about how important is your tribe. I think about also building new communities of people that inspire us in that way. And you know, Danette and I have both experienced that through some of the work we do with Thought Leaders Business School. That's an example for me of people, they often say, be inspired by the company you keep. And part of my ability to imagine a different future for myself or an amplified future for my business came from being inspired by watching what other people have done. So it's not always imagining a whole new universe that I've never seen before. It might just be imagining myself in a universe that I've now seen other people inhabiting, or they might hold belief for me before I believe it, that it is possible for me to go into that new space. And so it might not be, as I said before, rainbows and unicorns. It might just be a level of success or life by design in some way that they go, no, this could be for you. You could like imagine yourself in that space. And I think that for me has been enormously helpful, is being surrounded by people who, they may not be doing the exact things that I want to do, but they're showing what's possible, which makes me believe that it might be also possible. And that's why representation is so important. I'm thinking about this. It already is it for you, but not yet for me. It's not International Women's Day for me till tomorrow. But I think about that on the, you know, the day we're recording this is the day of International Women's Day. And what does it mean for people to be able to see role models? And the way that that's showing up for me right now is we have a new women's ice hockey league in Canada. And it's booming. And I love watching the crowd watching the hockey players, because the crowd is full of young female, usually kids, who are finally being able to see a professional league that goes, it is worth it for me to keep going playing hockey if that's what I love to do, because there's somewhere for me to go with it. And so that's not just, it's an imagination that's not a create a rainbows and unicorns world. It's I can imagine my future now because I can see it. And that's an interesting dimension of imagination for me that takes a group, takes a whole community or society to be able to, just not just hold the belief for you, but create some pathways that make it possible for you to have a life that you maybe didn't even think was a thing if you've lived in a very limited circle of people.
Thanks for that, Rebecca. There's lots of fantastic points in there that I'm going to jot down.
Thanks.
Yeah, amazing. Great question and great example there, Rebecca. I think, definitely in Australia last year we had a lot of stuff with the Matildas, which is our soccer team, our women's soccer team, that sort of really exploded, and it was very exciting. So it is exciting to see that there are these changes as well. Let's jump into, and I guess this is sort of a segue into my question, because the creation of the new hockey league over in Canada is amazing, and that's a very sort of instant thing that's happened, and now we've got things sort of spurning out of that, and that's very exciting. But my question's more about the gradual. So I'm imagining, in my mind, when I'm thinking of imagination and imagining your life, that you think of it first, and then it's a slow process to actually getting to a sort of more sort of different version of yourself. So for me, my question was, how difficult / easy is the transition period, and how can you stay focused when other things might pop up that may put you back in where you were?
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about this in terms of our discomfort with in between, right? The official word for it is liminal spaces. We don't like them. We don't like transitions. We don't like change like those in between. The word means threshold, and we don't like being in between things. And so a friend of mine told me about the expression, the hell of the hallway, right? Imagine one door closing, like in a hotel, door closes behind you, but you don't know what other room you're going in next, and you're standing in this hallway, right? And we don't like it. So we want to shorten that time. We want to, and that can lead us to get a little panicky, and maybe make some rash decisions, maybe rush our way through it. And so in some ways, there's part of me that wants to say to people, don't rush it, because our tendency is to rush it because we don't like that in between kind of untethered, unfamiliar feeling. On the other hand, if you are stuck there are ways that we can accelerate our progress through those liminal spaces. And part of it is with other people, maybe a coach, for example. Part of it is by having a process, like steps to follow or some key milestones we're looking at, that kind of keep us, it's not necessarily rushing through it, but momentum is very powerful. And so if we can find ways to create momentum, progress helps us. So progress, people, processes, all of those help us to move through these liminal spaces with a bit more, like we feel encouraged in that sense. And so when you were talking about kind of falling back into things, I think it also partly depends on whether we are reimagining almost by choice or by circumstance, because sometimes it is just a sort of this lovely, luxurious, I wonder if I could, And sometimes it's forced upon us. Maybe you lose a job, maybe you lose a parent, like something like that, or, your kids leave and you knew this was going to happen, but you're also going, oh, I got to reinvent myself here a bit, or, financial changes, whatever it is that kind of puts you in that in an unchosen way initially. That's when mindset becomes super important, because how we frame it can really determine the pace and sort of healthiness with which we move through it. So if we are in it like kicking and screaming and hating every minute of it and speaking of it negatively, and it just has a very different vibe than if we can get to a place where it feels like an opportunity, where it feels exciting. And that's usually not that happens more in us than it does in the circumstances. That's a choice that we have to get to a place of being able to make. So I guess what I mean is that falling back into old patterns sometimes isn't even available to us. And so sometimes you're just in the hall because that door has locked behind you. And other times you're just peeking into the hall because you're quite happy in the room that you're already in, or whatever. So sometimes we're pulled, sometimes we're pushed, sometimes we're stuck. And I don't want to be too prescriptive about, it's like grieving or something. You don't want to put a timeline on it. People go through it the way they go through it. But having some company along the way and some language around it can help us, I think.
Yeah, I mean, they're all great points. I've definitely jotted down that metaphor of the hell of the hallway. I actually have a story where that happened to me. I was working on this TV show, and I was showing a guest to his guest room, and we walked into the fire escape and got trapped in there, and the door did lock behind us. And so I had to walk him through this weird, dingy parking lot and then back into the entrance, and then I just handed him off to someone else who knew actually the layout of the building. So
I am with you, Jez. There's a particular hotel in downtown Toronto, and I was there for a job interview. I was 21, and they took me in there by train, and I felt very important that I got to stay at this beautiful hotel. And I arrived really late at night before the job interview the next morning, and decided to order room service because I could. And I'd never done that before. And I kind of didn't know what to do, right? And I finished my meal, and I went to go put it out in the hall, because I guess that's what I thought you did, or what you do. I don't know. I don't know if I've even ordered it since. But I went to go put the tray outside. I was already in my pajamas and like a nightgown. And as I put it outside, I slipped because I went to go put it down. My foot that was holding the door open moved, door locks behind me. And now I'm in this fancy hotel in my pajamas without my key going, yeah, okay, this is much more me now. So I had to go all the way down to the lobby of this very fancy hotel in my nightshirt that my mother had made me for Christmas. And, here I am 30 years later, still remembering the story. So I get it.
That's great. It's really, it's made this metaphor almost too real for both of us, I think. Yeah, all right. Well, I'm going to jump into our final question here. This is from Marg. Marg submitted this one, and Marg asked, do people hesitate on reimagining their career and lives due to financial stress and times?
I really appreciate this question, partly because I want to acknowledge that a lot of the work that I do assumes a particular level of privilege that I recognize not everybody holds. So I'm always trying to find ways of making reimagination accessible to people, because I'm a huge fan, for example, of sabbaticals. I think I know in Australia you have long service leave, we do not. And I feel like that kind of thing should be available to more than just academics, that's pretty much the only group that gets it regularly here. So I'm a fan of that kind of thing as a work perk, as a retention strategy, for example. And lots of people don't have that kind of work at all. If they don't go to work, they don't get paid. And, there's a certain level of privilege, because for me, a lot of the imagination, motivation or fuel comes from imagining I'm a big traveler. I love to travel, and I'm just very conscious of how the idea of travel or sabbaticals or things like that are grounded in a lot of financial privilege that I recognize not everybody has. So I've been thinking about this because I don't want to pretend that that's not the case. And yet I do think that it's quite possible to have the kinds of dialogue that I've been talking about. That's not a financial thing. We can have conversations no matter what situation we're in terms of money. We can also be creative in all kinds of different ways, and that doesn't require money. So for example, the way that my family traveled for most of the time that my kids were growing up is we did home swaps, home exchanges, instead of staying in hotels. So I'm a really good bargain hunter. And I don't want to belittle this, because I think the bigger question is, if you're thinking I should change jobs, I can't afford to go for very many paychecks without having a job, right? So I understand the bigger picture of this, but I also think that there's a lot of ways we can access our imaginations and strengthen our imagination muscles in that sense, by being inspired by people we read about, or what do we choose to, what does it mean to read? I don't know, right now I'm reading a biography, a memoir, or what does it mean to read fiction or travel writing that makes our world bigger without it necessarily having to affect our actual job? Or could we show up differently in the job we have? So I don't want to, I'm a bit conflicted here, because it kind of feels like, if somebody's super stressed because of some major economic disruption and you tell them to meditate for 10 minutes longer or go to a yoga class, you're like, no, the individual solutions are not solving systemic problems. And I think economic inequality and privilege and oppression are not something that are going to be solved by me reading a better novel. But are there ways that I can strengthen that imagination muscle in me without breaking the bank? Yes. There are lots of people who, I think of it like blending paint, right? Where you don't just take one color and then move to another color. There's kind of this blending of it. And I feel like lots of people can do that in work, where you might keep your day job and you have your side gig, and gradually your side gig grows into your day job, right? Lots of work in between. Nobody should have to juggle 2 full-time jobs, and there's friction and pain in the middle. But I think when we are making values-based decisions that energize us and totally light us up, we will do the hard things required to make that possible. And I don't think, without an imagination to say, I can picture why this is worth it, I can picture that desired future I'm moving toward, without that, we're not going to do the work that it takes to get there. So I don't necessarily think that it's a therefore don't imagine. It might be a what's the pace? How do I access it? How can I be resourceful about stretching the resources I do have? How can I expand my network of people I know? In some of the anti-poverty work I do, one of the biggest things for people who want to break out of multi-generational poverty is the fact that their networks are of other people that are in that same, all of us, our networks tend to be in the same economic snack bracket that we're in. So that's not just true for economics. We tend to hang out with people like us, right? So to the extent that we can expand that, not just economically, but in other ways, there's just lots of levers available to us, even if it isn't high dollar figures.
Amazing, yeah, and you're right. There's so many different ways you can kind of blend different things and kind of do your own thing. So I think that's also a great hint. Well, we've got to the end of our questions, but I do want to grab some final thoughts from everybody on today's topic because I've jotted down a heap of notes. So I'm sure everybody else has as well. So let's start with Al. Al, did you have any final thoughts on today's conversation and just reimagining careers and lives?
I really love that analogy of being locked out in the hall. I can relate to where life does push us out and we don't have a choice. From there, I'm thinking, who am I going to hang around with when I'm out in that hall? And I love that idea of hanging around someone who's not like me. That's where I'm going to find different. And my final thought is, can I be the person who encourages other people to get out of that safety zone and do something different in their life, be that champion for someone else?
Yeah. Amazing. Well, thanks so much for that, Al. Great insights today and great questions, so thanks for that. Graham, I'll go to you. Any final thoughts on today's conversation and reimagining careers and lives?
Yes, thanks, Jess. So many. Rebecca, this has been amazing, so thank you. Lots of notes. I'm reimagining a lot of my stories at the moment because they include an eastern brown snake, and I'm wondering whether I might go down Al's path of just having a crane in my story in future rather than a snake, because I think it might be a bit safer. And John's comment about when we were kids being sent outside, and I can remember almost exactly the same phrase from my parents, go outside and don't come back until dark, although they left the till dark part off. Wait a minute. I loved everything about this, so thank you. I like the mental creation precedes physical creation thing that you mentioned, and I do love this idea of reading fiction and things like travel writing, and that can make our world bigger. And I guess on another level, that sort of thing is so much more accessible today than it was even 10 years ago for most people on planet Earth. So, thank you. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Amazing. And thanks for that, Graham. Great stuff today. Let's go to Danette. Danette, any final thoughts on today's conversation and reimagining careers and lives?
Totally loved the conversation. I also have a hotel experience in the hallway where Graham and I stayed at a place in Sydney where to get to the bathroom, which was in a loft, I didn't realise that there was a door that went straight to an exit, and we set off the fire alarm in the middle of the night. Ouch. So we should do a whole podcast on that.
I love how suddenly the one person pushing the door open became we set the fire alarm on.
That was me. Well, I totally love this conversation. We definitely need to get you back, Rebecca. I really love that whole idea about the collective and the dialogue to be able to expand what we can imagine and reimagine. And the whole thing about space. So Jez's bit about, the in-between, getting comfortable in that space as much as we possibly can. Some great conversations throughout this. So, thank you so much. It's so great to see you.
You and you.
Amazing. Thanks so much for that, Danette. Sending the virtual hug there, always good. Rebecca, before we wrap up this conversation, any final thoughts you had on today's conversation and reimagining careers and lives?
Well, I love the fact that even in this conversation, I too have found my imagination sort of sparked in different ways and have been taking some notes of things I want to think more about. And that just shows that I think out loud as any good extrovert would. But I think the other thing I would say is that in some ways in this area, it's hard for us to trust our brain. So back on the head, heart, gut thing, we need to hack our brain into imagining because our brains prefer familiar. They prefer known, they prefer safe. And so the biology of our neuroscience is that if your brain is saying to you, no, don't do that. It's really, I think part of the process of this is figuring out when we really have to trust that and listen to it carefully. And when we have to say, yeah, no, you're leading me astray here into some very safe, boring territory. And I actually don't want to do that. So I'm thinking about that, of that intuition piece. I want to be someone that is highly intuitive, and I'm also skeptical about our brain's tendency to hold us in territory that is really known and safe. And so I appreciate being able to push the edges of that, because historically there's some really interesting writing. Geography of Genius is one of them, where some of the most innovative, just exciting things in history have happened in groups. Like this idea of the solitary genius is kind of a myth. And so if you think of what's going on now in, say, Silicon Valley, or what went on in Renaissance Italy, or all kinds of other sort of historical moments where lots of innovation happened. It happened because groups of people created a critical mass of it and got together and did it. And so I'm pretty excited about that possibility. And I love the fact that when I'm working in this, I'm working kind of system-wide and organizationally and individually. I find that multiple scale really, really rich and interesting. So thank you for this. It's a treat to have this be a group activity as well. So thanks for including me.
Absolutely. And Rebecca, I'm sure a lot of people have been listening to this and gone, you know what, I need to reach out to Rebecca. There's some great ideas here. I need to learn more. So Rebecca, where's the best place for people to reach out to you and find out more info about what you do?
The easiest place is to just look up my name, because I seem to be the only person in the world with this name. So Rebecca Sutherns is Sutherns. So Rebecca at RebeccaSutherns.com. All the information of my stuff is there. The books I've written, the most recent one of those is called Elastic, and the I in Elastic stands for imagination, but there's 6 other letters as well on that one. And I write a weekly blog there. And upcoming retreats. I'm going to start doing some global retreats so that my friends from Australia and other places can join me. So we're looking into something pretty exciting in Central America for early next year. That'll be up on the site pretty soon. So that's the easiest place to reach out to me there, or on LinkedIn by my name. And I would love to hear from people if they want to continue this conversation at all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Amazing. And all those links are going to be in the podcast description, so you can just go click those right now. Rebecca, I want to thank you so much for being on. What a great chat. To everybody, Al, John, Graham, Danette, great conversations, great questions, great insights, and great whole stories from everybody. And to everybody that's been sharing and listening, I want to say thank you. And as always, have a magical week.